we created a role. So actually now we can boot up any Raspberry Pi, have it provisioned, then actually hold the post configuration, just like, for example, Sander showed you guys with setting up Kubernetes, worker nodes, master nodes, putting up the container network interface, that kind of stuff. That we did actually already with roles, but it's actually not quite that. What I actually would like to have is a module in Ansible that will tell me, okay, quite simple, guys, this is the ITGilde target, for example. This is the learn ID, for example. I would like to have it, for example, 60 gigabytes. By the way, it should have these access parameters. So it should have, for example, also be a block device or coming from a file. And by the way, you should copy actually this template on it so it actually can run it. The problem that wasn't there. So if you need to do this kind of stuff, you actually need to write such a module in Python. And that's actually quite not an easy way to do. So the next thing actually we had is, okay, I was talking to Sander, and Sander was busy with this Ansible course, and in this Ansible course, he shows you actually how to configure all kind of virtual machines and bare metal stuff, and even, for example, how to set up your Kubernetes like we saw this morning. I was also, okay, I also would like to do something with the network device, because actually Ansible, next to doing the stuff normally on Linux systems and kind of even Windows systems, is also applicable actually for network devices like routers, like switches. But the big problem is the switches that are supported, they are mostly at the big iron, the Cisco Catalyst. These are things actually that will cost you and set you back 4,000 euros, for example, that kind of stuff. And the normal small business switches, for example, they're not supported. And that actually, even if it's Cisco, for example, and even if the interface looks a lot like the iOS networking interface, Network OS, that's actually on the big iron, it didn't work out of the box. And so someone was actually asking, how can we get these working? And then actually what we had is, of course, a lot of people start working with this kind of switches. And let me show you a little bit what actually works out of the box if you help it a little bit. So I'm going to pick up now one of my terminals. I might have sometimes a little bit of a lag. Please forgive me for that. So sometimes actually my screensaver kicks in and it takes a little while for the screensaver actually to recover from that one. So I'm going to back and actually show you also a little bit of which, because both Sander and I actually, let's see, almost Ansible Cisco module. That's what I need. And to show you a little bit, so what we're talking about, in this case, this is the big iron. On these switches, actually out of the box, you can run Ansible. You need to do a few things like setting up an SSH user and that kind of stuff. And also I'm going to show you, because I bought actually 2 of these switches, and these are actually not for 4,000 euros. I'm definitely not that rich, but quite simple. These switches actually got out of support in October 2021. So actually you can get them really cheap now. So for around $180 to $200 actually, and depending on what kind of actually a license they have, they can get a little bit cheaper or they can get a little bit more expensive. But these switches, actually everything works out of the box, but neither I nor Sander actually had these kind of switches. Actually, what we actually have is these kinds of switches. The brand is also Cisco, so we were actually thinking very naively, this would work, but actually, no, it doesn't directly. So the first thing actually that most people do is this. So we have here or Cisco, for example, and what I can do in this case, I can tell, I'm going to pick up Cisco SMB command. This is actually where it all starts. Most people do that. And so actually what I have here, I have an inventory file. I'm going to show you a little bit later how it looks like. I've got here a switch that's called switch 4. And one of the things, of course, that is important to realize is that a switch is a different thing than a Linux virtual machine or a Linux bare metal machine. Yes, I can access it, for example, with SSH for most of them. But what they don't have, for example, is things like Python. They do look a little bit like a Windows machine, for example, where you also not really can do all the stuff and you have to do some special stuff to actually get onto it. But what these guys actually did, the Ansible guys, they're working with switches, of course, for a long time, and they have a very minimal module, and in this case, it's been borrowed from the Cisco SMB command. I'm going to tell you all about this collection. We did a lot of work on that one. Originally, it's not from mine. It's actually from another guy. And they worked a lot of stuff actually, but they didn't do the change stuff. But we'll get to that a little bit later. But the command stuff, that's actually always working. And the command stuff actually, because the switches are from Cisco, actually the iOS command stuff, because this is nothing more than just a verbatimly copied iOS module, they work. And what I can do here is I can actually, just the same as Sander, for example, this morning told you guys, we can actually use with command or shell. I can actually, of course, shell won't work because we don't have a bash shell on these iOS, or actually on these Cisco SMB switches, but we can do this kind of thing. So actually what I can do here, I can actually run these commands one by one on the switch, and then I can actually capture the output using the register command. And in this case, I'm going to capture it in a variable called output. And then, of course, we're going to show it. And actually, what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to say, OK, I'm going to use the debug module, just like Sander did this morning. And then we're going to output it to the screen with Ansible. So actually quite simple. Everything is captured in this case in this dictionary called output. This dictionary actually does have an item called standard outlines, and that's actually all the output captured with all these single lines. So not one big package, but actually just like it actually would do on the command line itself. So to show you a little bit, let me take you to the inventory file. Demo. So for example, here we have actually the inventory, and this is not an inventory, for example, in any file format. You could do that if you'd like to. In this case, actually, a lot of the networking stuff actually is being happening in YAML files. Also, in this case, my inventory file is in the YAML format. It's not a problem. Actually, Ansible does fully understand that kind of stuff. Important here is I'm going to set up, in this case, the Ansible connection. This one is called actually network command line interface. I'm going to have my SSH user, which is admin. Of course, I need to configure my switch for having admin access, but most of you guys actually have. Please do note that a lot of these switches actually have quite some old, outdated security profiles for SSH. And so, for example, let me show you. Most probably, I already corrected the issue, but if I do this kind of stuff, you see, and I didn't correct it, so quite nicely. You can actually see, okay, I'm working here from a Ubuntu version. In this case, it's an Odroid, which is actually a, so this is using the latest Ubuntu version, for example. And you can see here that actually my SSH client doesn't want to talk to the switch. Why not? It was quite simple. It says from all the modern key exchange algorithms are actually offered to the switch, they don't accept one. What they actually say, they're giving me a counter offer, and they tell me actually you could use these. But actually, if I'm looking these up, for example, on the internet, you will find out that these are deprecated, and they are deprecated actually quite simple for the reason that okay, I can make the lines the letters a little bit bigger. Let me do that. See profile preferences. Give me the amount of space. Yes. Let me see. Okay, better. Okay, so this is a Ubuntu 2021 run, and actually the SSH, the client here tells me, okay, I don't trust this switch because it's actually using very old key exchange mechanisms. And I can't change that. Even, for example, these Cisco SMBs, they're not that old. Actually, they're 2-3 years old, actually. But even with the latest firmware, they still... Okay, you can't see the letters bigger? Let me check if I can make it even bigger than it is. Okay, it's okay now. Okay, just let me know if it doesn't look too too readable. Just let me know. Okay, again, and so these key exchange algorithms, they're too old and that kind of stuff. I can't change them on the switch because they already have the latest firmware. And even, for example, for the Catalyst, they have exactly the same. They even have the last firmware, so there will be no new ones and that kind of stuff. So I can't change that. But what I can do, for example, as this one tells me, for example, okay, this one is something that I do support. As a H1, for example, quite simple. I do believe that even your Android telephone is being able to hack that kind of stuff. But again, it's something that we have to live with. What we can do is actually go into our SSH directory. And now we have a file called config. If it's not there, we can make it. You'll see a lot of these items here. So what I can do here is actually pick up host. And then I need to pick up actually the IP address of that one. Let me first pick it up again. So in this case, it's 127. So I'm going to do this. Host 10.8.5.9.127. And then I'm going to, because this is exactly the same one, I'm going to pick up. And actually, this is not only, for example, Cisco. So a little bit later on, I've told you I'm not going to do only the big iron. We're not only going to do the little bit less big iron, little bigger iron, for example. We're also going to talk a little bit about the TP-Link switches, because actually there's a little bit of a project of mine going on there. And actually, we're making quite some nice progress with that. And for example, if you would like to learn a little bit and would not like actually to buy these very big network devices, they're very expensive, for example, you can also test a lot with actually the TP-Link device. I'm going to show you that a little bit later. So let me show you, if you're lucky. Yeah, here we have it. So now you can see for these switches, it's actually here. So I'm going to type in the admin, and I have to be very careful. Yes. I'm going to begin my password and that kind of stuff. And this is actually the command line also that Ansible sees, but quite simple. There's no Python. There's no such thing as actually all the command line completion that you have normally with Bash. Of course, there is command line completion. And so let me, for example, to become actually almost to become my link is not really. In this case, it's already there. I'm already, because you can see that on the hash. So I'm already, in this case, in the enable, so the super user command, the admin version. And if I would like to do something, for example, I can do show version, or I can do, for example, show interface and status, for example. This kind of stuff I can do. You can also see here, for example, there's a page here that's actually going to hurt me a lot in another project. We'll get into that a little bit later on. So quite simple. I can do these things quite easily already with Ansible, but still the same thing. Let me go there, SMB. So I'm going to pick this one up. Command. So I'm going to do this here. I'm saying quite simple. This is my module from my collection. It's called command. And again, this could also be, for example, cisco.is.command, or for example, the other collection actually that we made is called community.tplink.command. I can all do that kind of stuff. So this says, I will show the version. Then I'm going to show the interface configuration, and I'm going to capture the output actually into this variable, into this dictionary actually. And then I'm going to output what actually it is. So let me show you that this works. So Ansible Playbook -I for the configuration. Just go SMB YAML. So this is my inventory file. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the Cisco SMB command. And this is my YAML. Now, let's see what happens. So it says execute the commands on the command line. You also see here get effects, because also my devices, my network devices actually do that. And you can see here, this is the output from the first command. This is actually the show version that will give me actually the versions of the different system images, different firmwares that are actually now on the system. We have an active, we have an inactive version. Again, I'm not a network specialist from Cisco and that kind of stuff. So most probably in our meeting, there are a lot of people exactly knowing what this says, but this is really nice, because also with this very simple way of getting information, for example, from the switches, you can write reports. You can see, for example, you can with commands, for example, I did this in the past also, upgrade your firmware and that kind of stuff. And here, for example, if we see actually the show status, so interface status actually, and that will show me in this case, for example, all the ports that I have. This is a 10 gigabyte of a 10 gigabyte port router. No, sorry, it's a 10 port gigabyte router. And actually you see here the different interfaces, for example. So this one's actually having combo ports and that kind of stuff. Now we see the duplex, we see the speed, we see pressure, we see mode and that kind of stuff. We see, for example, if the state is up, etc. And to be honest, actually, this is one of the switches that's in the room a little bit further on. I'm also connecting sometimes to switches actually in my home. So if I make a mistake during this meeting, then some of my sons will actually cry out because they are losing their connection to the internet and most probably lose a war on Destiny 2 or something like it. Okay. So that's one thing, because actually this is quite simple. This is only reading stuff. And actually this is with the command line, and reading stuff is always quite easily because like Sandra already told you, when I read things, for example, this is always idempotent, because if I read it one time, I read it the second time, quite simple, I do not change anything. And when I restart it, I will get exactly the same result. Indeed, of course, if there are some other things running at it, then we'll get a new one. But my run will never actually influence another run, that kind of stuff. So this is fully idempotent. Yes, router-OS is also really nice. Could you make the letters a bit bigger? Again, I'm making it a little bit more better and bigger again. Please wait. And also, router-OS is really nice, but router-OS currently is also not really well supported. And maybe we can work on that one, because actually, I'm trying to get the TP-Link and the SMB switches, for example, under Ansible, we did learn quite a lot. And I don't think it's really well documented actually how you can write or port these kind of things, but actually the Red Hat guys, the Ansible guys, really did make a nice way actually to get things more structurized than they had it in the past. So I can really advise your boss, for example, to hold on a little longer, because we're also going to try to see if it's feasible actually to make a course where we're actually going to teach you, for example, how to port modules or how to extend, for example, network modules and that kind of stuff. Okay, so this was the reading part, and again, this is where most people actually start. And Sandra and I actually did exactly the same. We had these SMB switches, and actually, they're quite simple, and they didn't even the fact gathering, for example, doesn't work out of the box. If you try to do that with the IS modules, for example, we get some really weird Python errors that it cannot pop off things from the stack and that kind of stuff. But this is actually helping you in the first way actually to do stuff. Okay, let's pick up a second one that I actually created. And again, I'm trying to get as much into the improvising flow as it. So during the talk of Sandler, I created a lot of the stuff actually to see how we can best actually entertain you in this. So this is actually the same, but we have actually, in this case, the show. And actually what we're going to do here, I'm actually going to do a change. And quite simple, what I need to do on such a switch. And again, most of you are network engineers and that kind of stuff. I know this stuff much more better than I do. But quite simple, I'm going to log on to the switch again. That will be actually happening automatically. And in this case, I need to go into the so-called config mode. So my prompt will actually change. Then I'm going to try, and this is, for example, things, and I've seen a lot of switches the last 6 to 7 weeks and that kind of stuff. And in this case, on the Cisco switches, for example, this is a way to actually describe which interface I'm going to specify. This is a gigabit, and it's actually port number 5. A little bit later on in this talk, I will also show this stuff, for example, on the TP-Link switches. And the TP-Link switches, for example, they have this with a lowercase g, for example, and in this case, the port designator is actually separated, for example, from the interface name. So quite simple, that's a little bit different, but also that kind of stuff works. Then what we're actually going to do is I'm going to change the description of the interface, and I'm going to tell it as welcome all. So this is actually a change, this is a write action. Then I'm going to get out of the config. This is actually giving me in config mode. This will end my config mode, and then actually I'll try to get my interface description. And if we're a little bit lucky, actually we'd see that actually the description for Gigabyte Ethernet 5, for port 5, should be changed into this welcome all. And again, if we will actually go to output here, the output is quite simple. All this stuff is actually happening on the switch itself. So actually, just like with Ansible with SSH, I can't see what's actually on the output on the remote node. So actually, we're going to capture that, and this will actually display it on my local controller. Okay. Let's also do this kind of stuff. Playbook, Cisco SMB. Come on to YAML. Oh, it says quite simple. You forgot to mention your SMB inventory and hit YAML. Yeah, it runs again. So the first part should be exactly the same. We should get the same output, but the second task actually should give us something else. Actually, you can see here, this is just what we had. And now it's going here. And you can see here that for the description, Gigabyte 5 is not Ansible Gigabyte Internet, but actually is being called now welcome all. And of course, seeing is believing. I can change that again. Welcome. Oops. Again, welcome, friends. Time to run it again. Yep, I can also do that. Profile preferences. Let me see. I would like to have a paper-white one, I guess. Use system settings, color blink, blah, blah, blah. Title command colors. Background. Yeah, I can have schemes. Sunrise lights. Better. Okay. So now it's changed to welcome friends. So I didn't lie, this just works. There's only one big problem with this. Again, it's command. This is definitely not idempotent. And one of the things that we actually try to strive when using Ansible is making Ansible, actually making idempotent playbooks, that kind of stuff. Because quite simply, if I don't like idempotency, if I don't need idempotency, I can just do these kind of things. Actually, just native Python, or I can use a bash play script or something like it. So this should be a little bit more different. Okay, let me show you first how these things, for example, run on the big iron. And again, that's a little bit of what we had. This was actually the base that we had. So I'm going to this one. So, and to show you a little bit, let me check. So these are the big irons. So I'm going to see if I can reach them with. And again, these are switches that in the past, that means before the end of October, they would have set you back 4,000 euros and that kind of stuff. They're not funny. And even there, for example, again, I'm not a Cisco guy, and for all the brands in the fall that I'm calling, I'm not endorsing anyone of them. The only one thing that I have a little bit of a warm heart for is for the TP-Link ones, because actually I did see a lot of surprising things when I was actually trying to bring these guys under Ansible. The interface actually of the TP-Link switches, they look a lot like, for example, the Catalyst switches. There are even things, for example, that were easier for me to port from the Catalyst switches to the TP-Link than they actually were for porting them from the Catalyst to Cisco's own SMB switches. And for some reason, someone did a really nice study actually to the interface. So, but again, yeah, I have no preference, that kind of stuff, except for, of course, I don't want to give out too much money. So that's one of the reasons why I also like the TP-Links. And I hope actually one way that they are going to support our project a little bit. So I'm trying to get into it. So let me see if I did. Yes. For the guys in the Netherlands, yes, this is a funny name for a switch, but I had to find something. Again, these switches are not running any production here in my company and that kind of stuff, so no worries about that one. The SMB switches, they are running, as my sons are calling it, production at home, so they will not be really happy when I actually, break things. But okay, again, these are the big ones. You can also see this kind of stuff. So if I do a show version here, for example, you can see here, this is a true C3560. This one is actually a 24 bits, and also I've configured it with these fiber links and that kind of stuff. This is the big way and that kind of stuff. Okay, so also here, I can do this kind of stuff for command, but actually that's not what I would like to do. The command stuff is fun, for example, if we need to do some things that is not yet implemented in the modules. But luckily, on iOS level, and also all the other switches, because again, I'm not a networking guy, so that means, for example, for Cisco, I know these switches, because I've worked with that using Ansible and that kind of stuff. I know there's a lot of other operating systems with Cisco. I don't actually understand their offerings and that kind of stuff. What I was thinking that, for example, just like Sandra did, if the SMB branch of switches, for example, Cisco is having the Cisco brand name, then most probably they actually are compatible with everything that I put on them also in the iOS switch. But actually, that's not the case. They do have some, some strange differences in that kind of stuff. So, okay. But again, these also have just the command line and that kind of stuff. We can get into that. Okay, let's start a little bit because the first thing actually that we would like to do, and that's also what we did during the project, because the ultimate goal is actually to get a Python Ansible module for the QNAPs. And the QNAPs actually, they are a little bit more easy than the switches, because the QNAPs, they are actually just Linux in the box that actually functions as a network attached storage device. But quite simple. We couldn't find any Python examples and that kind of stuff. So, well, we actually stepped on the bandwagon to see, okay, can we get actually the TP-Link switches working? And so that what we did is, okay, what looks like a TP-Link switch, well, that's actually the Cisco SMB, for example. But the problem is, later on, we found out actually that also the Cisco SMB switches, they were not fully featured into Ansible. So actually that led me to actually still purchasing 2 of these Catalyst switches. And again, not for 4,000 euros, just a little bit under 200 and that kind of stuff. And that helped me actually understand how things are working. So let's see. First thing actually that we need to do is getting facts out of the switches. And that's also what we did for the TP-Links. The first goal that we actually said is, okay, can we get the configuration from these switches actually into the dictionary? Just when I'm actually connecting to a Linux host for the first time and I do not have gather facts on no, it will actually get me all the information about the system. It will tell me the host name, it will tell me, just like Sander said, the family of the operating system. It will tell me, for example, which file systems are there, which network, which storage volumes are there, which file systems, some partitioning, how much memory there is, how much CPUs are in, what kind of CPU, if it's been in a virtual environment or it's just running bare metal, that kind of stuff. And actually, the facts for switches do something alike. So let's pick up this one. And again, we're now using already, or we're going to use already the simple things. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to the Cisco switch. And actually, all the items will be, in this case, in Ansible, actually the global items. Now, the only thing that I need to do is touch the switch. And then you'll see actually here with this one again, all the items will actually be put in the dictionary called Ansible facts. And that should tell me a little bit about the switch. So let's see if that works. So Ansible Playbook. And I'm going to do -i hosts. And what I'm going to do then is actually pick up the playbook. And here, the channel. Okay. So, see here, there's a timeout. What actually happens, this is quite nice. This is a very medium switch, only 24 ports. In my 19-inch rack, for example, there one is actually directing all these Raspberry Pis. It's actually a PoE switch, power over Ethernet. So I can actually individually power on or power off one of the Raspberry Pis. And one of the goals, actually, I already have filed a paper for Sevilla, so I hope they will invite me, is actually that we have a on Kubernetes, a automatic horizontal node scaler. And that means actually, for example, if the Kubernetes cluster, for example, says, okay, we need more worker nodes, for example, we actually just power on some more Raspberry Pis and have them automatically actually joining the cluster. And using a PoE network switch really makes it really handy. But that 52 ports, if I need to gather all the information about these ports, that might take a little bit longer than the default timeout, for example, of I believe it's 30 seconds or something like it. And so sometimes you need to actually put it in. And again, I did see that it was 10 seconds here. So, but in this case, this is a 20-port switch, 24-port switch. It's not too much. Let me just take a look. Actually, it did come back. You see here, this is all that the switch gives us. Sorry, this is a little bit too far. Here we have it still not. Here it is. So this is actually. So saying ignore the timeout, and here you have actually the directory task, and that actually tells me here all the items. This is of course a little bit strange because actually the switch itself definitely doesn't run Python. This is actually the Python from my system. This is actually the IP address of my Cisco switch, and if, even for example, because I do have L2, L2 plus, and L3 switches. And what you see here, for example, this one has not actually a IPv6 to it. So in this case, it's the file systems that are on the networking device. You see here the little bit silly host name of my switch. You see which net image it has. And of course, you see a little bit later on, we have the other switches. They have, for example, some information they do have and some information they don't have. For example, the TP links, They work with the images a little bit different, for example, so you won't see that kind of stuff. Here, actually, we have in net interfaces, all the interfaces that we have. This is the management interface. You see here the bandwidth is actually in bits. You see the gigabit Ethernet, so 0 till 1, and this is actually for so-called stacked interface, stacked network devices. These Cisco devices can be stacked, so you actually can have them in certain numbers and that kind of stuff. So from a second one that's stacked, actually we have the gigabit Ethernet 1/11 and that kind of stuff. Let's see the MAC address. You see the media type. You see here the MTU. Yeah, you see in this case, this one is down. We have also some stuff, for example, that is up and that kind of stuff, where there is a description. For example, you will see it here mentioned, that kind of stuff. But this is actually where it starts, getting information actually from my, I have to correct me a little bit because I did see here already one feed. This is actually from the extra add-on port for the Cisco switch. In this case, this is from the special ports that can either figure as a 10 gigabyte Ethernet, or for example, a gigabyte over fiber, which is only 1 gigabyte. Also, we have here the VLAN 1, for example, the management VLAN with its IP address, subnet, MAC address, and that kind of stuff. Here we see some information about the networking iOS, and we see the model, for example. And here, for example, you see the neighbors from the LLDB, the link layer discovery protocol. 4 weeks ago, I didn't know what it was. Now I know. And this one, for example, is showing me actually which other devices, for example, that do have the LLDB protocol have, for example, published their information. So, for example, you see here also its counterpart, the other switch, for example, it's actually been connected using the gigabit Ethernet, in this case, the 10 gigabyte ones. Here you see, for example, a microstick that's actually in a completely different office, but yeah, also that one is actually being able to use, how do you call it? Ansible. However, I did hear from Frederick, a colleague of ours, is actually that the MikroTik support is actually also not that good. It's actually a little bit the same. This is one of the SMB switches, for example, etc. And here it's the net Python indeed, the serial number, and you see if there are stacked normals and the stacked modules. Also, it happens to be that the interface add-on have for the 10 gigabyte ports, for example, is also being seen as an extra stack and that kind of stuff. But this is actually where it starts, getting information outside of the instance. This will already allow us, for example, to write reports. So, for example, if I need to find out, for example, which of my switches have a below standard firmware, for example, I can find that. I can also, for example, look up the uptime of my switches if they are too long up and I would like to reboot them. All that kind of stuff, for example, I can already do with only having facts and maybe, for example, a command. Let me show you a little bit from the other ones. Again, because the next thing that we had is, okay, we would like to do this also on the TP-Link switches. But again, there's actually not really no one did start a TP-Link project. Someone did start a Cisco MB project. This actually, you can find it on the Ansible Galaxy website. And after the meeting, I will share the information so you can find it and that kind of stuff. Also, all the things that we actually added or corrected and that kind of stuff, we will also actually donate back to that project. There are actually 2 projects doing something with Cisco SMBs, for example. One is actually with the last push to Ansible Galaxy. It's almost more than a year ago, and actually he did have everything, but nothing works anymore. And the other guy actually only has facts, and we later on find out we hoped actually that he did have also the config modules, because that would make it very easy for us actually to port them to TP-Link, but they didn't have to change modules. So they only had actually the read-only modules. And there's also something I found out, because someone was telling me, says, okay, you can nicely read from these systems, but I cannot make any Ansible change actually. Of course, we can use the command module, but again, that's not idempotent. That's not really the real deal. That's not how it should work. So actually, what we did is also make the right modules. We're going to get into a little bit. But first, let's go into the inventory. So we can do that exactly for them. I'm going to show you in this case for all the 3 architectures that we are using. So this is the other one. This is actually not the one I need. This is the Cisco SMB. In fact, this one is what I need. Yes, here we have it. So it looks a lot like the other one. And actually here we do gather a subset. Config is actually giving us all the config information there is. Let me put that one out in this case and just only put the interfaces there. So Ansible, Playbook, -I Cisco SMB, inventory. Here we have it. And then I'm going to pick up the Playbook with Vugt. Here they go. Okay, you actually can see here, and we only removed a little bit of some faulty things in it. Most probably still some stuff is actually there. And you can see here, for example, there were a lot of spelling errors actually in the module. This one is actually, I was not sure if they meant it, but actually this needs to be pressure actually, and some other stuff actually didn't run. But you can see here from both the switches actually that we had in the inventory file, it actually gets all the information, the IPv4, and even, for example, here, because we also configure them for IPv6, it actually gets them out of that. And you can see here, these are the hardware modules. They look a lot like the iOS switches, but still a little bit different. And here, for example, you have the different networking interface, network ports, and that kind of stuff. And this one also has fiber channel ones, but you can see it's a little bit different. You're missing here, for example, the description. We can actually build them in, there's not a problem, but actually they didn't work out of the box and that kind. And that's what we did then. Let me show you also the other one, and then we go back to the things that make it really fun. That's actually how to create or use modules that make changes. And also there, we started again with the big iron actually. So I'm going to pick now the TP-Link ones. So this is the TP-Link. Let me show you. Yes, pick up this one, TP-Link Vugt. And again, these are switches I'm going to show you now. These guys don't cost you 4,000 euros. These guys don't cost you 400 euros. These guys cost you 80 euros. This is actually a T5100 switch, which actually is fanless. And again, I'm not endorsing anything. Just show you actually how, let's say, how simple life can be. These actually have 10 ports with 2 fiber ports. Only 1 gigabyte, that kind of stuff, but they're also completely programmable with Ansible once you have the right modules. And actually we created these. So here we do exactly the same hardware interfaces. There's actually the only thing that's different here. I'm using not, for example, Cisco iOS. I'm not using community SMB. I'm actually using here a community called TP-Link actually. So we have this namespace, and actually still have to claim it, by the way. Ansible Playbook -I TP-Link inventory file. Also, this is just a YAML. It's just, and then we do a TP-Link, and then it's vugt.yaml. Okay. So you can already see this is what we did. So actually, quite simple. This is all work together with Kel. Kel is actually my eldest son. And what we actually did is we completely rewrote, we actually adapted the Cisco iOS and the Cisco SMB stuff, and actually made sure that all the information from the switches, from TP-Link, was actually digestible in this case for these modules. And you can see a few things are a little bit different. So for example, if I look at the preamble, for example, you see we have a net bootloader version instead of an image. We have a net contact, that kind of stuff. You see the CPU load is exactly the same. The description actually you got from the switch and that kind of stuff. You see here the host name, and also here a net interface. And it was one of the most difficult things actually to do, is actually to decode all the information that's in the switch and give it in the use. And here you can see that here we did manage to get the description also into the dictionary, that kind of stuff. But this is actually where it all started. And also you see here the port channels, for example. You see the VLANs, you see the IP addresses, even the IPv6, etc. You have the location, MAC addresses, etc. Neighbors, I haven't, actually was busy implementing that kind of stuff. You did see that with the Cisco's, because they already have that, but that's actually also there in a few moments, in a week or two. Okay, let's go a little bit back to the Cisco ones, because again, this is where it all starts, getting information out. And again, so that's quite simple. That's always idempotent. Now let's do some changes. And also what we actually did in the project was quite simple. If you look at this big bag of Python code, and again, for some reason, Python programmers, I'm actually a C programmer. I'm doing things in Golang and Node.js and that kind of stuff. And quite simple. I write code normally that I say, okay, even if my youngest son is actually going to read it, he should know a little bit of what's actually happening. And for some reason, there was a lot of Python code. And I'm like, okay, what's actually happening there? So we actually implemented a lot of stuff. Actually, you have writing out information, what's actually going to the switch, what's actually coming back from the switch, and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it took a long. But again, I had to make also sure that we don't get too frustrated. We actually set our goals really small. So the first one was getting the facts. We actually got that within 1 week. And the second one was actually, okay, let's do now stuff, for example, that will change the main parameters of the switch. So for example, let's do something that we can change the host name. Let's do something, for example, that we can change the management IP, that we can change, for example, the NTP or the DNS name service, that kind of stuff. So that's what we did. And also, of course, the first thing that we do is check how does that kind of stuff actually work on the big iron. So going back to this one, pick up here the Cisco sys. And actually what we're going to do here is I'm going to show you a little bit because we need some information here from the inventory file also. I'm going to actually here again just play the Ansible facts just to make sure that what we have actually. Then I'm going to do in this case configure the host name and the domain name, and we have this one, for example, set into a so-called group files file. So in this case, it will actually reset the host name and it will reset the domain name. It will actually say, okay, we're not going to use in this case any lookups for the name service, but we're going to configure, for example, the name service. And of course, it was really nice. Let me check, because a nice thing actually to show you is, first let's get, this is the host file. So here actually we see the name actually of the switch. This is the Ansible host name, which means that it's now called Woki switch if I'm correct, and it should be changed actually to access 01. So once I do it once, it should actually give me a result that is yellow, because yellow means in this case in Ansible, just like we have with the virtual machines and that kind of stuff, that a change was applied. Yeah, things did change. And green means actually, we did find actually the current state is equal to the desired state, so nothing needed to change. And anything in red, that's actually bad. Okay, let's do this. Ansible Playbook. And by the way, group files is actually being used here. You can see that here for network. It's actually here having a network YAML. That means that this file will be read because it's actually part of the group network. And the LAN, for example, will be because also all the children actually are part of the LAN group in this case. And so in this case, we'll actually read the network.yaml file, and there will be the DNS names in. So let's pick up Ansible Playbook -i hosts Cisco sys.yaml. And let me check. So here you can see there are no facts. That's correct because I did configure no, do not get a fax there. So and actually here you see this one is now yellow. Of course, seeing is believing. Let me first go onto the on the switch. That's it. I'm going to pick up, and this one should then report itself in this case as access 01. Pick it up. Almost. Yes. Today, yep. And you can see previously it was Woki, and now it's actually access. Of course, the next thing actually that's important because there's also things that we needed to test. If I run it a second time, it should actually show me that the current state is equal to the desired state, and so there should not be a change. So actually, this one should be green now. Let me see it. Yeah, you can see here, this one is green. And again, if I change things here, for example, so I'm going to do it last time, then I'm going to show it also on the other ones. So, by the way, I don't have an issue with accessing my switches currently because the switches are being accessed currently on the IP address using the inventory file and host, for example. So I can change it anyhow I would like to. This is the Cisco Catalyst 365, if I'm correct. Let me show you a little, because of 356 could also be it. 3560, this is it. Yeah, no worries, Sam. We also can do this on the little big iron, and we can also do this on the El Cheapo TP-Link switches. That's one of the reasons actually to do this kind of stuff. It actually serves two goals. First, I definitely would like to know how I can actually make my own Ansible modules in Python, so that I can actually have Ansible natively support my QNAP network attached service. And the second one is actually to get indeed because we don't want our students, Sander and I, actually to have to buy these 4,000 euro switches just to practice, for example, for the network switch Ansible exams, that kind of stuff. Okay, let me do that. Okay, now it did change it again, so it should be yellow again, because actually it has a new name. There it goes. And now it's yellow again. Okay, let me show you also that on the little big iron. I like the word, by the way. Cisco looks a lot like what currently Intel is using, but actually, yeah, of course, the guys from how do you call it? ARM were much earlier with that kind of stuff. Okay, we do here the same thing. So I'm going to use in this case Cisco SMB sys.yaml. We're going to change a little bit up. So here we have it. So you see exactly the same, just doing always the gather facts, for example, because that will show me that my switch is working well. So I'm actually going to do here. You can see actually here, this is the name service and the host name is exactly the same. And if I run this kind of stuff, and it might be because my switches already have this, that it might be green, but we'll see that. And actually this is Cisco SMB inventory, not YAML, Cisco SMB sys.yaml. So here it runs. Yep, see here the gathering facts. Takes a long time. Okay, here it is. Now, in this case, it says it has changed it, for example, because I didn't have them right now. So you can also see that this works on the little big iron. And now, of course, that's actually where all pride and joy is getting into it. The TP-Link ones. And of course, they have a little bit of a different subset. I did have one. Did I created one? So no, then just let's see. TP. Where do we have it? Okay. I'll pick up this one and rename it. No worries. Okay. Pick up switch 6. Yes. Okay. Oh, this is nice. This is really nice. Just pick up. I'm going to delete this one. I'm going to do that later on. I can pick up this one. Okay, you can see actually here, because the fun thing, of course, if you start with some other switch, for example, it also gives you the freedom actually to add more functionality on it. I'm actually used this one in the guru meeting of last Thursday. And actually then I did first actually propose that we actually change this LED one to something else. We're going to that in a few moments. So this will actually not configure DNS. This is actually just configure the TP-Link switch. And again, we can see here, I'm going to become yes, because I need to actually get into super user mode and admin mode actually to connect. This is actually, again, the namespace, the collection, and this is the, I still called it, by the way, iOS, because the TP-Link guys still didn't give me a name for their internet of their network operating system. So we may change that in the near future. I'm going to change the host name again the same way with Ansible host name. This is a nice one because on the TP-Link switches, for example, I can actually switch off the activity LEDs. So I, for the last one, actually, I did, okay, let's change this one, for example, in the module and actually call it Christmas on. All the LEDs are on, Christmas off, none of the LEDs are actually on. But this one, for example, will turn the LEDs on and off, for example. So if you like to have a dark office, you can actually say LED off, for example. Here I'm actually going to do the location. Now, let's change that one. So, ITGilde. Let's change this one to my Chief Security Officer. Okay, controller enabled. I don't like this stuff, by the way, with cloud controlled network devices and that kind of stuff. So that's enabled, but I can also configure this kind of stuff. Yes, I do have this code also. Actually, I pushed it just, I believe on the second Christmas second day. I pushed it to the repositories on GitHub, so they are available. And this is how to show actually the NTP. This is actually the prefix for Europe. So that means actually that on the predefined times, the last Sunday in October, the last Sunday in March, then actually we're going to have daylight savings time, that kind of stuff. And this will actually tell me that it needs to apply this one. And also really nice that it didn't work in the past. It was quite simple. All these switches were not supported by Ansible. And oh, that's a nice misspelling. Okay, there it is. I'm going to share the URL to the repository after when we end the meeting. No worries about it. So you can see here, it's actually configuring it. And we're going to do here after, we're going to do a 15-minute coffee break. I think we can have that. And after this one, I'm going to show you the more difficult way. So for example, what we have, this is just the the configuration of the switches. So switching the name of the switch, putting in the contact information, doing the more global configuration. After the break that we're going to have now in 50 minutes, I'm going to show you, for example, how to change the configuration on the interfaces. And actually there's a big change. And actually that change will be effective. That means that the old ways of doing things will stop working in June 2022. We have a more declarative way of actually configuring all the interfaces and the L2 and the L3 features of the switches. Okay. Okay, guys, quite simple. We're going to do a 50-minute coffee break. I will see you guys back in 50 minutes. And then we're going to do the interface stuff. And after the meeting, I'm going to also share with you guys the repos. Is that okay?
Yes, okay.
Okay, I got some questions in the chats, and we're going to start in a few moments. First question that I have was, okay, what's actually the cheapest model of TP-Link that you can buy to get this actually supported to play with the modules, for example, that we created? Well, the cheapest one is actually the T1500G. And that one is very, very cheap. And pre-Corona, actually, this one costs you some 80 euros, for example. Now in Corona time, of course, it's a little bit around 100 euros. There's another one. That's the SG3428X. That's a little bit more costly because that goes around a little bit above, I think, 260 euros if you look really nicely. The good part with that one is actually it has 24 ports plus 4 10G ports and that kind of stuff, and it's also fanless, and it's also a layer 2 plus switch, so you can actually do a lot of stuff with that one. And for the Cisco's, for example, if you would like to work with layer 3, you could, for example, try one of the S350 switches, SG350 switches, for example. The biggest one that I currently have from TP-Link, let me check that in my A52. That's a 52 port switch. It's actually driving all the Raspberry Pis in the 19-inch rack, for example. It's an SG3452P. Let me copy that one. And that's actually a little bit around 400 euros, but it is also a power of Ethernet switch, for example. Yep. So the other question was, okay, do you have any experience with configuring the TP-Link switches using the serial port? And actually, I did see that on the newer ones. So, for example, the 3428, for example, that I got in 2 weeks ago, that one indeed has a serial port, both RJ45 plus also with a micro USB, for example. Technically, it should be possible, but only with a command, I guess, because the other stuff that would be a little bit more difficult, and you needed a terminal emulator for that one to work that one correctly. But I think technically that is possible, but I have no experience with it, so I'm sorry for that one. Okay, guys, let's continue. So first, we're going back to the big iron. So what we actually did till the coffee break was quite simple. We looked at the facts, to actually get information from the configuration of the switches. And we looked at all the 3 of them. The next thing was actually getting something to work, to change. We actually looked at the global configuration of the switch, for example. And what we're now actually going to do is the more difficult stuff. And also it took us a lot of time actually to get that fixed, both on the Cisco SMBs, because they didn't have that. The whole actually idea of us was, okay, quite simple. We'll pick up the Cisco SMB module because it's already existing, and actually also that is a community effort actually. But we actually found out that the only thing that I could was actually gathering facts and that kind of stuff, not change stuff. So what we actually did is we ported first from the big iron, and then we actually brought it back to the little iron, so the SMB switches, and then actually brought them back to the TP-Links. And then actually now what we do is we independently actually also develop the TP-Link ones. Okay, let's first go back to the Cisco one, the big iron. So these are the catalyst switches. And actually what we're going to do now, let me show you if I didn't forget some stuff. Here we have the yes, this is what we need to go. Yes, I'm going to, because here's actually quite a thing actually that confuses a lot of people. And actually did confuse myself also. And also it did wreak havoc on the configuration of my switches more than one time. So that's definitely something that I would like to discuss with you guys. First of all, I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick. Let me check. This is the, facts. Yeah. Yep, this is this one. Yep, this one I'm going to show you in a few moments. That was 3. And this is 2. Okay, yeah. So that's a nice way actually first to find out actually what's going to happen on your switches. And also this will help me, for example, show you what actually happens with the different states. The whole idea actually behind this is that if you look, for example, at the Ansible pages, in this case, for example, for the iOS modules, that's not the iOS, these are actually all the network modules that we have. Let me see if I can, no, I cannot make them bigger, but I'm going to here to the iOS. Here we have it. And you see here, for example, there are two modules to manage interfaces on iOS devices. And actually, here you see that for the other ones, they're also coming around that because this is the new standard. The first one is actually a module called iOS underscore interface, so the singular form. And that has a different kind of parameters. So if you look here, for example, the best is actually to look at the, and I'll also pick up one actually with me. So for example, now I'm going to copy and paste it and put it just into the, okay. So this is the interfaces, .yaml. So interface.yaml. There we have it. I'm going to paste this one so it's actually also big. So this is the old way actually of configuring interfaces. And the new way is different from that one. So actually what you do have, important is the difference is actually in the new one is actually a plural form. So it says iOS underscore interfaces, for example. And the old one is called iOS underscore interface. And actually you'll find it still back here in the big iron. They also have the new one. If you use this one, for example, in your playbooks, it will actually tell you that it's deprecated. It's going to be removed, actually going to be replaced by the iOS underscore interfaces, the plural form. And actually you have is you have, in this case, you specify the interface, then all the options belonging to that one. But as you can see here, I can only specify actually one interface. And that means, for example, if I would like to configure a lot of interfaces, say, for example, 4 or 5, what I actually need to do is actually loop over this one. And that means every loop will means a new connection to the network device and that kind of stuff. And quite simple, that doesn't work too well. That's not really efficient. They actually created a way to change a little bit. So actually we see here under, we have also a so-called aggregate. And this actually allows me, for example, within one module, actually to do a configuration, but not too deep, actually of a number of interfaces. So for example, here with aggregate, what they actually do is both the interfaces 0.1 and 0.2, they actually get configured, for example, but for example, the other stuff here with duplex and speed, I can only specify for all the interfaces being named here. So this isn't really, a really fine-grained way to do that. So actually, they developed another module interface, and that's actually the future. So we also should use that for the SMB, for example, switches. We also copied actually and converted the old one. But for example, for the TP-Link switches, because there was actually nothing, we just said, okay, no, we're not going to do the old ways. We're only going to actually implement the new type of modules. Let me show you how that works. So I'll pick up here the iOS interfaces. And again, this is sometimes a little bit confusing, but let me show you that. This is not one, because this is the first one, yes. I'm going to copy this nicely, and I'm going to give you some real world examples in a few moments, but just to show you the difference between them. So this, for example, indeed is, you can see that here, it's the plural form iOS underscore interfaces. And the difference is, and actually all the new modules, so all the new school modules, they have actually the same interface. They don't have this, okay, I'm going to specify one interface, and then I'm going to describe the properties, what needs to be altered, for example. No, all these modules, be it, for example, iOS interfaces, or for example, if I'm working on level 2, it's iOS L2 interface, because there's also an iOS underscore L2 underscore interface, so the singular form. They all actually work with this config parameter first. Let me go this and remove that, iOS. Yeah. So the demo gods are not with me. So this says I have a configuration, and this way it actually says, because it's iOS Interscape, so I'm going to describe the interfaces. And this one says, I'm going to describe interface Gigabyte Ethernet 02. And I'm going to give the description, and I'm going to say it's enabled. This says I'm going to also configure Ethernet 3, and this one says configured and merged as the description. I'm going to set the MTU. I'm going to say it's not enabled. So in this case, that means that I'm going to put a link down. It will be configured for speed 100, and it will actually have a full duplex and that kind of stuff. So this will allow me much more fine-grained configuration actually of the interfaces, and also all the other stuff that you'll see, the L2 interface, the L3 interfaces, and also, for example, the link layer, discovery protocol stuff, the LLDC stuff, for example. You will actually see they work the same way. They all have this config, and then actually the list of the items, and actually they go per interface. For example, if I have VLANs, for example, they go per VLAN and that kind of stuff, but that's actually also an interface. I'm going to describe that. And then here, this is where things are getting a little bit confusing, because normally we have quite simple. If you look at, for example, the normal Ansible modules, and I'm going to say, for example, I would like to have this logical volume there, or I would like to have this package installed, then I say, for example, state is present. Or if I would like to have it removed, I say state is absent. Or, for example, if I would like to have my package to be the latest one available in the repos that I have access to, I would say state latest, for example. Okay, here we have some things more. We have, for example, merged. We have overridden, very dangerous. We have deleted, and we have, for example, replaced. And also, for example, we're not going to cover that one in this afternoon meeting. We also have, for example, parsed, gathered, and rendered. They're actually more to show you actually what would happen, for example, if I would actually do that kind of. So a little bit of a, let's say that. A tryout, a dry run, that's maybe the good way to tell that. Okay, let me first show you that, because that actually works best if we can see how it's going to do. First thing I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to make a initial configuration. And then I was asked actually to make sure that I'm going to, okay, again, font size increasing, or have you already had that? Okay, let me do the font size again. Oh, that, most probably that's the font size of the website. I'm sorry, I couldn't increase that, but this font size is enough, I guess. Huh? Okay, let's go into it. This is the Cisco config in it. This is actually telling me the switch I'm going to config. This is the access switch. In this case, I'm not directly going to get a fax. And I have here my configuration. And this configuration, I can put that in a file. I can also put that, for example, as variables. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to configure here the Ethernet devices, or the Ethernet ports, in this case 07 and 08. And I'm going to actually put access to the VLANs. So in this case, this will configure 07 actually for VLAN 10. And I'm going to actually, in this case, not use, for example, iOS interfaces, but iOS_L2, the layer 2 configuration. And here I have actually the VLAN 10, and I'm going to actually put the voice on 40. And here I'm going to do a second one. In this case, I'm going to configure it for trunking. In this case, I'm going to allow 10 till 20, 40. My native VLAN will be 20, and my pruning VLANs will be 10 and 20. And the application of the encapsulation actually will be .1Q. Okay, so this is the configuration I'm going to apply. And here are actually some tricks. First, what I'm going to do, my module is called L2 interfaces. And what we'll see actually with Ansible network playbooks, and the modern part, the new school one, is actually that all these these modules, they have a name, and they actually have a kind of a Python module in each of the following domains. The first one is actually in the so-called org spec that actually tells me, okay, this module, for example, has the following attributes. So for now, you don't have to know anything about it. There's more if you're going to write your own modules, but it'll tell me, for example, that the config will actually have a name, that there will be actually for each interface that I have, actually the interface will have a name, and for each interface, for example, have a mode, and by the way, each interface can have an axis, can have a VLAN definition, and then, for example, if it's a trunk, then below that, for example, can be these properties and that kind of stuff. The second one is actually the facts. That means, for example, that module will get all the facts belonging to this module. So for example, if I'm going to configure interfaces on the layer 2 level, the L2 interfaces gather, the fact check gathering will actually get all the L2 interfaces, and actually we'll get a structure for that one. And that's actually what happens here. So we gather network resources. I'm saying L2 interfaces means please give me the current configuration of the L2 configuration of all the interfaces in my switch. And what I'm doing here actually, and this is actually a trick, you can actually use that, for example, to prefabricate, for example, your configuration on L2 and also L3, and you can actually use this for all the modern modules. I'm actually going to get them up, and also I'm going to save them actually in a file. And so actually what happens here is the L2 interfaces will actually give me, in this case, all the Ansible network resources in there. I'm actually with content and copy. Yeah, there's a new one actually I use. Most people can know copy, but from a different way. For example, copying files from one file locally on the agent to the, on the controller to the client and that kind of stuff. This is actually copying the information from the switch, and actually in a fact, for example, we're going to convert it in this case using Jinja to the YAML, and then actually I'm going to actually put it here. This is the directory. This is actually an internal Ansible variable. And again, Son and I am also going to give a advanced course on Ansible where all these kind of tricks, for example, we're going to show you. It's quite simple. And also in ATOS, for example, we're using all kinds of Ansible playbooks actually to completely configure Kubernetes, be it what kind of a distribution you would like to have, but also, for example, setting up virtual machines, etc. All the kind of stuff. And there's a lot of tricks actually that we can teach you with that one, but that's in the advanced course. But this one is telling me, okay, this is the directory where the playbook is running. Of actually, the playbook is actually being read. So this is actually the name of the system I'm going to gather. So in this case, the name of the switch I'm going to visit. This is the name of the playbook. This will help me, for example, I can just copy this piece of code in any playbook I have. And for example, in this case, the playbook will be called Cisco config init. And then it actually says, okay, this pre.l2, which actually identifies for me, for example, this is the pre-image, actually the pre-configuration before I did any changes to that. And L2 gives me, in this case, okay, this was on L2 level. And of course, I could also put that in the plain name, but let's do that. So then what I'm going to do here, and I actually made it very flat here because the config here, that's what I have here. But I can also, for example, pick this one up and actually inline put it there. But in this case, I just use the config, which is quite easy actually to change things there. So put it here. This says good, and this one says state merged. And these states, that's actually where things get a little bit tricky and confusing for a lot of people. And actually, this is not only for the L2. This is not only for the global layer of the interfaces itself. This is not only for L3 configuration, for example, interface. That will actually be called iOS_L3 interfaces. By the way, normal interface configuration, for example, would be just iOS_interface and that kind of stuff. But it's actually for all the new ones. So all the forms actually have this plural stuff. And the IO system that I did show you, for example, that doesn't have that. It's quite simple. I don't have multiple configurations for my switch globally on the switch, but for my interfaces, I have a lot of them because each switch port actually could have its own interface, or could have its own attributes, that kind of stuff. So actually, we're going to configure it here, and this is actually then the inline, which you actually see above, and actually the state is merge. And merge means what we're going to do is actually dear Ansible, and actually also dear switch. What we're going to do is I did declare a configuration. Please take the configuration, and it is now on the switch, and make it merge. And what does that mean? That's quite simple. That means if I, for example, in this case, let me show you that. I can see that also in a few moments. Here we actually say, quite simple, this is my gigabyte Ethernet, for example. I say this one has access to VLAN 10, and this has voice, for example. There will not be much strange things here. But for example, for mode trunk, for example, and if I do remove, for example, the native VLAN, or put another item here, if the current situation, for example, says, okay, let me just show you that. So I'm going to remove, for example, here native VLAN. And if, for example, native VLAN 20 was already there, it will not override it. It will just leave it as it is. It will merge it. So it will take the current configuration and add and only override when actually I say, okay, it needs to change, but it will not, for example, nullify any objects, any attributes actually that I do not specify. So for example, if this one is just not named here, then quite simple, if there's native VLAN, for example, 40, it will stay native VLAN 40, for example. If it is there, and I say it's native VLAN 20, then it will change native VLAN 40 into native VLAN 20. That's actually what a merge do. And actually, most times, a merge is pretty safe. I will see a few others, but just let's see what happens actually. Yeah. So the first thing that I'm going to do, because I do not know the state of my switch now, and actually, yeah, this works exactly the same also on the other ones. And then really, the first thing that I work with is kind of a new configuration on Ansible. I had, okay, I don't know what I think about it, because it's there's even, for example, the overridden that's completely dangerous. That means, for example, if I do an overridden, it actually delete all the configuration except for the configuration I've defined in config. And I can tell you, it did, for example, delete a lot of stuff. Even, for example, my access to the management interface of the switch and that kind of stuff. It actually means that you're sawing off the branch of the tree you're actually sitting on. So that kind of stuff. But actually, overridden is something. If you need that, you need to be thinking very carefully if you need that kind of stuff. The other ones, they are a little bit more safe. Merge is the most safely one, because actually that only overrides what I'm telling it to override. So let's show first the override, for example. Okay, here we have it. Sorry, the merge in this case. Let's see that. So I'm configuring there. Again, this is on layer 2 level. The first thing that it does here, it stores the pre-configuration states. And again, that's not directly into Ansible. It's actually me using Ansible to provide me that functionality, because it helps me actually first when explaining stuff. Now we can see a few things. First of all, it actually, what it does say now is it did store it, it did configure it, it's yellow, which means it did change things. And actually, again, here, I'm going to gather the information again, for example, and I'm going to post it here again. So I'm going to write it. And so quite simple what actually happens here. This is, of course, always green because it's a read action. It doesn't change anything, so it would never lead to an Ansible change. And here, of course, I'm writing a file, or I'm updating the contents of a file, so that will always lead to a change. Okay, let's show now that. So, and actually, this is a really nice trick. I can really recommend you that. So first thing I'm going to see, this was before I made the change. It actually jumped to the configuration on layer 2 level for all the information, all the interfaces I have. So I can see that. So in this case, I nicely and neatly actually cleaned up everything, because you see here, no VLAN, except of course for VLAN 1, which was always configured, was actually explicitly configured on the interfaces. So, okay, now I'm going to check here, for example, on the upper and then post. And this is the state of the switch regarding layer 2 configuration on the interfaces after I did it. And so you can see here what it did. Indeed, and it's a little bit difficult to read because quite simple, you see here the interface name, and then you say, okay, hey, that is strange, but actually this is actually valid YAML, because actually this is the name. And if I, for example, would write the YAML myself, I would always start with the name of the interface, but it doesn't matter for YAML actually where you start and stuff with. I will come back to you that yellow. So here we have the trunk. In this case, for 8, we have here the VLAN voice and the VLAN actually for access. So this one was there. If I'm going to run this twice, so for the second time, then actually what should happen is, of course, that it should be green. So let me show you that. Okay, now indeed here you see configure, and you see actually it's green. There was no change. It's quite simple. The current state and the desired state, they are actually exactly the same. Okay, let's now play a little bit with it, because that's what we're here for. So I'm going to config init again. Actually, I could now change the name of the of the playbook, because quite simple, it's not an initial configuration. But for example, let's do now this. what I'm going to do is, for example, I'm going to do two things. First one, I'm going to remove this one. So I actually should leave this one in, not change it, for example, because it's still a merge. And I'm also, what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to put the voice not on 40, but on 60. So this will lead definitely to a change, and the expected result is that it will leave my first item actually untouched, because quite simple, I did not ask it actually to remove it. I asked it to merge it, and of course, the voice VLAN item attribute, that one should actually be changed. And let's see that. So I can see indeed that this is a change because things are getting changed. So. And I'm picking up, in this case, the pre.l2 to make sure that we have it. This one definitely says, in this case, this is pre and VLAN is 40. That should be 60 in a few moments. And we have here the native VLAN 20. I didn't mention it in the new configuration, but due to the merge, it should be there. So what I'm going to do now is check the post.l2. And what we see here, access VLAN is 10. Voice VLAN was changed from 40 to 60. And we see that the native VLAN is still there. This is what a merge does. So if I'm not specifying attributes and the attributes are already there in the current state on the switch, they remain untouched. So therefore, actually merge is a quite safe one. It doesn't do anything, delete something or override something, unless I actually say that it should be. And that most people actually use this one. If I'm going to delete stuff, I can do that. So I'm picking up my, and apologies for reusing, in this case, my playbook. And I'm going to do that here. Now let's pick up first the other one. Now I'm going to say replaced. What does replace mean? I'm not going to do, by the way, overridden, because otherwise that would directly sound the end of my presentation, because I cannot get to this switch anymore. Okay, so what this means is actually with replace, we'll see that the VLAN 20, for example, that one is actually the native VLAN 20 that is not being mentioned, so that should be removed now. Because actually I'm asking you to replace the subset of configuration that is now with the switch. So no merging, just replacing. If it's not there, it should not be there. Let's see if it works. Again. And again, this way with writing out the configuration in YAML, actually pre and post, that will help me understand and find out, for example, what's happening. So you can see actually here it picks up the pre-config, and of course that's always a change, because quite simple. That means that we filled in the file. So let me go there. So I'll pick out pre-L2. And this will show me this is what we had, the VLAN 20, and we see the native VLAN 20 still there, because this is the pre-configuration. And now we go to the post configuration. And what we see here, the native VLAN is gone. See? So this, but important, the difference between merge and replaced is quite simple. With merged, something I don't specify, what is actually available in the current config on the switch will be preserved. And when I do a replace, actually it verbatimly copies this subsection of configuration to the switch. If something was configured on the switch but not specified in the config in Ansible, then it will actually be deleted. And of course, when I specify a new attribute, it will be overridden, that kind of stuff. Okay, the other one I'm going to show you, again, overridden, I'm not going to demo that one, because that is destructive. That actually quite simple means this only part of configuration I specify now, that's the whole configuration of the switch. So all the other stuff that I have there, on layer 2 level, for example, I cannot hurt too much, but for example, on interface level, if I'm going to say only these two interfaces, for example, up, I'm going to bring down, for example, a management interface, that will really wreak havoc, and that will actually directly terminate this presentation. So we're not going to do that. I'm going to show you the delete, by the way. And the delete actually says, okay, this piece of configuration I have here, and I can do that. Let me pick it up. So, And if you would like to, you can also, for example, in this case, the configuration, you can put it in a file, for example, and read actually the dictionary from a file. This is really fun. The first thing when I encountered the code, this is actually needlessly complex, but it actually is quite nice. It really helps, to configure things. It also is much more friendly to the connections to your interface and that kind of stuff. I did have a lot of issues, for example, by reconnecting to the switch. For example, if I needed to change the description, for example, of 24 different interfaces on the big switches, for example, it took a long time because every time the module, for example, it needed to change thing and connection again, close again, and that kind of stuff. And then, things go wrong sometimes, and you got errors in the code. It is actually quite looks nice. This is really actually a you call it setting the desired state, and actually making sure that you apply that so that your current state on the switch actually get into the desired state as you specified in Ansible. So delete it. That's also that I need to know always. It's actually deleted, not delete. It's in this case merged, not merged, and that kind of stuff. It's something that I need to tell myself anytime. Nope. Ansible. Almost. I did use that one, by the way. No worries. I get again, I get a pre-file, pre-config, and I get a post-config. So configures the L2 devices. In this case, it means if I'm going to look in the pre.l2, you can see my configuration as it was. And still, of course, the 20 is not there because I did not take that over when I did the replace, for example. And if I look now at the post L2, post L2, here we have it. You can see everything is empty. So there's no VLAN configuration because the VLAN configuration I had there has actually been removed by the deleted one. Okay. So the important thing to remember is that this whole config here, I'm now doing this, for example, for L2, but for all of the other items, for example, that we have, let me show you a little bit. This is not it. This is it. This actually, all these things are Ansible Galaxy collections, actually. Pick this one up also. Ansible collections. Let's go. In this case, for example, we have here for Cisco. And then this is the SMB one. Now I want to do community. There we have it. Cisco SMB. Then we have plugins. Then we have modules. And for example, you see the modules, for example, that were for the SMB, for example. So you can look here at the L3s. This, by the way, is Python. And here, for example, are all the L3 interfaces, for example. The only thing actually that we did is made sure that they worked actually on the SMB switches, for example. The TP links, they have a little bit more. Go back, almost. No, Ansible. Go back to collections, go back to Ansible collections, go back to community, and then we go to TP-Link. And for example, here with plugins and with modules, you see actually the whole bonanza of these kinds. So the only things that are not working correctly is in this case, the static routes. So still have to look into that one. This is, by the way, one that we actually added with the cross, for example. We can even do things that the current Ansible modules, for example, for the Cisco's cannot do, that kind of stuff. But all that kind of stuff, you can see all here the interface. So let me show you also that how that looks like into a playbook. So, yep, Ansible TP-Link module. Okay, and here, for example, this is to actually create so-called link aggregation groups. So these so-called ether channels. And also you can see here they work actually also in the TP links, for example. And what we actually do is we give them names and, for example, port channel 1, port channel 2. I can also show you, for example, this is nicely working with, now it says merge. First, let's do a delete. Ansible Playbook minus ITP link inventory TP link lag.yaml. Oh, we got here an error. I like that. Okay, quite simple. What did I tell you? Where did I have to look at? Make sure that it's not delete, but deleted. Good. That saves me. If it works now, at least some debugging into the Python code. Here we have it. Yep, it changed it. And what we can do, for example, this is switch number 6, I guess. See if I can tell that to it. Didn't see that. TP link. 1500s. Admin. And so I believe it's this one. I'm already in the right network, so I need to specify its domain. No. I didn't configure this one yet in my SSH config. Then let's just do the old dirty one. I did already tell you that I don't like the interfaces of these switches. So actually here we can see in this case that there's no ether channel. We can also check that here. It's running config, for example. We actually remove this ether channel stuff, so it's not there anymore. Let's do it and merge it. So I'm going to pick up this one again, then say merged. Now need to have Ansible. Here it is. I can tell you, by the way, that for this switch, the second port is actually not connected, but I can show you that's actually been configured in the running config. So let's see if it works. Takes a long time, so this could be a timeout. I think this will be a timeout. Yeah, it's a timeout. Okay, we try it. Things happen. Yeah, here it is. Okay, now let's go to the switch and show you that indeed it did change the configuration. You see here both the interfaces are in general group 1 mode on. That means that they're currently in a link aggregation layer group. Okay. It's almost 3 o'clock. Yeah, there's a lot more of this to tell you, even the porting, for example, of the modules and that kind of stuff. And definitely in the near future, I will plan some more meetings on that one together with Sander and that kind of stuff. For now, are there any questions? I'm going to help you, Jelle. No worries. Let's connect over something else hereafter. It's a difficult one. The Cisco SMB, for example, if you get it from the Ansible Galaxy, it will give you a lot of issues in. There's one from my repo, for example, that's a little bit easier, but you can't install that directly from Ansible Galaxy yet. So you need to do some manual configuration. But we'll help you with that one after that one. Definitely would work with 2.9. I'm using 2.9, some of the later versions. I'm using 2.10.5 and that kind of stuff. So it should work actually. But the Ansible Galaxy one, that does have some issues. We didn't get that working quite well in the first one. And the other one, the Cisco.SMB, for example, quite simple. That one is having some severe bugs. It's not been updated for almost a year. And I can't get in contact with a guy, and he also doesn't have a public GitHub repository from that one. So, but actually, his implementation looks like the most evolved one, but it's also the one that is the most broken now. Okay, Gabor, thanks for. These Ansible modules are actually for the TP-Link almost firmware independent. There's one thing that I still promise you to tell you. For example, there's also a T7100 switch, and that one is really nice. For one way, actually, that it is a switch that costs only 170 euros. It has 24 ports. It does not have power over Ethernet, but it does have 4 10G ports, for example. It's also fanless, so that's really nice. The only problem is that although the manual specifies they have the so-called no command line interface paging option, the big problem is with all these automation scripts, if you do it really nicely, for example, in Python or using Ansible, is when I get configuration information over the terminal, over the line actually, I do not want to have a pager in place. So what happens normally on these changes, when you on these switches, when you actually go and access them, and you do, for example, a show interfaces, they will actually page all the information, one screen at a time. When you are in Ansible Python automation playbook script, for example, or an Ansible playbook, you don't want that. You would have to have actually all the information in one big stream to you, and not have to do that with the how do you call it? Each time that you need to press space, for example, to get the next screen. All these switches, all the business line switches, they normally have a kind of a command, for example, something like data pump, for example, which you have in Cisco, that actually tells us, okay, just put everything on one line, or for example, no clip paging, or not clip paging, as some people are calling it on the TP-Link switches, and that actually should overcome that kind of situations. The big problem with these 1700s is that they have this function advertised. So if you look at the command line interface manual, it tells you, okay, it's there, but when you actually try it out, you'll find it's actually not implemented. And I actually created a ticket with the TP-Link guys and asked them, okay, if you just implement this small, and that should be actually completely nothing, because all the other firmware versions also have that. As long as it has the no clippaging, for example, for TP-Link, we can support anything. For the Cisco, it's quite simple. Yeah, it's quite well served. For the big island, it's quite well supported in all the firmware version, that kind of stuff. For the S350, I've seen 2.5 and 2.7 work without any charm, so there's not directly a relation to firmware versions. The only thing that's really breaking stuff is, for example, on the TP-Link, the missing of the no clippaging item, for example. And of course, for other switches, for example, someone will mention actually the microtics, and a really nice switch is the microtics, because that firmware is really open and that kind of stuff. The only problem is also there, for example, the Ansible support is still lacking. It doesn't have the the full capacity where the Cisco's have. It doesn't have the full capacity, for example, what the HP switches and that kind of stuff have. And even the TP-Link switches, for example, are more supported now than the MikroTik. But it might be, I do have one MikroTik switch actually lying here. It might be that later on, for example, we're also going to take that up. Or for example, we're going to do a meeting actually where we teach people how to do this kind of. Yeah, data pump is also something from Oracle, but it's an option called configure terminal data pump and something like it. And then actually all the Ansible playbooks, all the Ansible modules from Cisco, for example, they try to do that, and they actually bump out, for example, when they can't do that kind of stuff. So that's also something that we actually ported from TP-Link. Okay, any more questions? Good. Okay. One more thing. Of course, the commercial part. The following. We're going to do a lot of again, just like Peter already told. We're going to do a lot of Ansible automation. How to call it? Talks and workshops actually in the coming year. I'll be doing also a few. I will pick up the KVM one. So. For example, I got a really nice Ansible playbook actually there that is able to provision, for example, complete KVM machines and that kind of stuff, with storage and all that kind of stuff. I will also deliver one for creating virtual machines and provision them, for example, in Azure. That one is also being used actually live because if we are giving a course, for example, about Kubernetes, CKA, CKAD, or CKS, for example, for my classroom, I actually need to provision all these machines and that kind of stuff, and I'm not going to do that manually. So actually, I have a playbook, for example, that I just specify how many machines I would like to have. If it's, for example, used for Kubernetes or for kernel internals or something like it. If it's Kubernetes, for example, how many masters there should be, how many worker nodes and all that kind of stuff. I'm also going to give another workshop about automation of network devices with Ansible, and I'm also, but that's a little bit more for if you're interested in the really deep dive. Is actually we actually did learn a lot of how to create actually the Python modules now for Ansible. As soon as I've completed my mission to get an Ansible module for QNAP, for example, I'm also going to wrap that actually into a course where you can learn, for example, how to write your own Ansible modules. So not roles and that kind of stuff. That's also really nice. I'm also going to talk about that in the future talk, for example. But actually, just in Ansible, I have a device, for example, or for example, I have a software product, and I would like to make the native Ansible modules for that, for kind of native Ansible automation. That's what we're going to talk in that one. No worries. I fully understand. First crawling, then walking, and then sprinting bus. No worries. Good. Yeah, no problem, Jelle. I will try to get into the GTC. Any more questions, guys? Good. I hope you liked it.
Yes, I liked it very much. Can you hear me, Pascal?
I can hear you.
Okay, and in the name of everybody who watched this impressive sessions, starting with Sander van Vugt and then Pascal van Dam, I would like to thank Pascal and Sander. I would like to give them a bottle of wine or something, but that's virtually impossible. So you keep that in mind for the next time. I have this nice jackets for you, both of you, with the SUSE instructor sign on it.